Over the last few years, there has been a strong demand for premium compact photography cameras, something that's more than just a basic point and shoot. The Lumix LX100 and its successor LX100 Mark II were both very popular for people looking for that kind of camera. But looking back at my own channel, the LX100 Mark II was released 7 years ago, when I was much younger and had a lot more hair. Since then, there hasn't been any update to this series. But finally, we have a spiritual successor, and it is the Lumix L10. I call it a spiritual successor because the L10 shares a lot of the same design philosophy and even some components with the LX100 series. They are both primarily designed for photographers, but L10 is not a direct replacement because there are also some pretty fundamental changes. So in this video, we are going to take an in-depth look at the L10, see how it performs in real-world use and how it's different from the LX100 too. And most importantly, whether this is the premium compact camera a lot of you have been waiting for. I will cover everything that I think is important, as well as things many of you asked about after watching my first impressions video. As I've just mentioned, the L10 is a spiritual successor to the Lumix LX100 Mark II, so the overall design looks very similar. Both have that classic rangefinder style design with a fixed zoom lens and an EVF at the back. But once you look a bit closer, you start to notice quite a few differences. First, size. The L10 is actually not a large camera if you compare to most of the latest Micro Four Thirds camera, but the L10 is quite a bit bigger than the LX100 Mark II. If you put them side by side, the difference is very noticeable. You may be able to fit it into a jacket pocket, but definitely not a jeans pocket. Panasonic used the term compact camera to describe L10, and I've heard some people disagree because it is not really pocketable. But to me, compact camera is more a class of camera rather than just looking at the size. I mean, Leica calls the much larger Leica Q3 a compact camera, and people also call the Fujifilm X100 a compact camera, which is pretty much the same size as this L10. So I don't see why the L10 cannot be called a compact camera. Yes, not everyone will like the larger size compared to the LX100 Mark II, but the increase in size is mostly due to the hardware changes. There's the newer, more powerful and bigger processing engine, which is needed for features like the latest face detection autofocusing system. Then there's the big BLK22 battery. It's the same one used in cameras like the S5 II, S9 and G7 or G9 Mark II. So if you have one of those cameras, you can share the battery, which is very handy. With the big battery life is great. For most casual users, I think one battery should be enough for the whole day. I believe this battery is also required to power that new engine, and there also are the necessary upgrades like improved heat management, which also increases the size of the camera. As a result, the camera simply has to be physically larger to fit everything while maintaining acceptable thermal performance. Because the larger BLK22 battery takes up so much space around the grip area, the SD card slot has been moved to the other side of the camera, and the card door opens from the bottom. This is the first time I've seen a design like this. The downside with this design is that if you are using a tripod or even just a quick release plate or a camera mount attachment for your camera strap, then you won't be able to access the memory card. But to be fair, it was the same for the LX100 Mark II as well. The L10's electronic viewfinder's resolution is 2.36 million dots, which on paper is lower than LX100 Mark II's 2.76 million dots EVF. but the L10 uses an OLED panel, while the RX100 Mark II uses a few sequential panel. So for people who can see the rainbow effect, this is actually a big improvement. It's not a huge EVF, but it is larger than the one on the RX100 Mark II, and I think it's perfectly decent for a camera of this size. The RX100 II had a fixed LCD screen, which was fine at the time, but now even the latest Leica Q3 has a movable screen, so of course the L10 does too. As a photographer's camera, I actually expect Lumix to go with a vertical tilt screen, but instead we get a flip-out screen. Flip-out screen is better for video or taking selfie or filming yourself, but since this is a photographer's camera, I definitely would prefer it has a vertical tilt screen. So I'm curious, do you prefer a flip-out screen or want a vertical tilt screen?
It is not a weather-sealed camera, so be careful if you want to use it under rain. Having said that, I used the non-weather sealed S9 under rain many times before, but of course if you want to do the same thing, do it at your own risk.
One thing I noticed is that when you turn your camera and shoot vertically, the user interface would change to vertical design. It's a small thing, but it's a nice touch. There's a hot shoe at the top of the camera, so you can use camera flash as well as accessories like the DMS1 digital shotgun microphone or even the XLR2 audio adapter. You can also record 32-bit Throat audio with those, which is something even my S5 II cannot do. The camera doesn't have any built-in flash, and there's also no small flash is supplied in the box. If you need one, you can use compatible flashes from Panasonic OM system or third-party brands like Godox. If you need TTL, the Panasonic DMW FL200L is a nice compact option. If you don't need TTL, there are plenty of even smaller third-party flashes available. Because the camera uses a leaf shutter, you can shoot with flash at up to 1/2000th of a second without needing high-speed sync. Speaking of the shutter, the leaf shutter is very quiet with minimal vibration. So that's great if you want to shoot discreetly. And it should also help when shooting handheld at slower shutter speeds. On a bright sunny day, 1/2000th of a second might not be fast enough, but you can switch to the electronic shutter, which goes all the way up to 1/32,000th of a second. In terms of connection ports, there are not many, just a microphone input and a USB-C port. That's it. There's no headphone jack and there's no HDMI port at all, not even micro HDMI. Two things about the USB-C port. Apart from you can use the USB-C port to power or charge the camera or transfer files to your computer, the L10 can be used as a webcam without any additional software. Just plug it into your computer via USB and it works. The image quality is very good, lag is minimal, and the camera is powered through the USB connection, so you don't have to worry about battery life. While using the L10 as a webcam, the main menu and the quick menu are both disabled. But you can still press the display button to bring up a menu and adjust some of the most important settings there. You can also connect the L10 to your phone using USB connection and transfer your photos or videos via Lumix Lab. Of course, you can still do wireless file transfer, but the USB-C connection is much faster. One thing I really like about the L10 is that the overall design is very clean. If you look at the front, there are no buttons at all. On the back, you get the usual Lumix style buttons and a control dial similar to the RX100 Mark II, but it doesn't feel cluttered. I think the larger body actually helps here, as it spreads the controls out and makes everything easier to use. I no longer second guess whether I'm pressing the right button without looking. I also really like the new photo video SNQ switch at the back. It makes switching between modes much more intuitive compared to the previous Lumix cameras. These little changes actually encourage me to switch between photo, video and SNQ more often than I normally would. There's also a LUT button for the real-time LUT feature, which we'll talk about later. At the top of the camera, there are two main dials. Unlike the RX100 Mark II, which had shutter speed and exposure compensation dials, the L10 has a PASM dial along with a customizable dial that also has a button in the center. I do love having dedicated shutter speed and exposure compensation dials, but the PASM setup is definitely more practical. It makes certain things much easier to adjust, and there are also 5 custom modes available, so you can quickly switch between different shooting setups. There's a small video record button in the corner. If you don't shoot video, you can reassign it to something else. In fact, most of the buttons and controls on this camera are customizable. If you are new to Lumix, you can usually customize buttons just by long pressing them. There's also a zoom switch on top to control the lens, which we'll talk about next. The grip itself isn't very deep, but the camera feels much more secure than the RX100 II in hand. I think that's also partly due to the rubberized texture on the grip, which doesn't feel slippery at all, unlike the RX100 Mark II, which can feel a bit slippery. I'm sure there will also be plenty of third-party grips and accessories available if you want a larger grip, but personally, if I buy the L10, I probably wouldn't add one. I think the grip is good enough as it is. Overall, the L10 feels much more refined compared to the previous Lumix cameras like the RX100 Mark II or the full-frame S9. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why. It could be the aluminum top and bottom plates, the grip material, or just some improvements in the overall build quality. But in hand, it just feels really nice. It feels premium. And yes, this looks great too. Especially this silver version that I have on loan from Panasonic. I've been shooting on the street a bit last 2 weeks, and there were so many times that people would come and ask me what camera I'm shooting with. Pretty much everyone saw the camera would tell me the camera looks really cool, and quite a few people even thought it is an old film camera.
What kind of camera is that? Are you shooting film?
Digital camera. This is a compact camera.
There's also a titanium special edition, which is a little bit more expensive, but comes with some extra accessories. Okay, now let's talk about the lens. The Leica lens on the L10 is a power zoom lens with a 24 to 75mm equivalent focal length with a collapsible design. The maximum aperture is f1.7 on the wide end and f2.8 on the telephoto end. The specs suggest it is the same lens as the RX100 Mark II, but it is possible there are some small improvements. There's an aperture ring at the front of the lens, and the clicks are very satisfying. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to keep turning it for no reason. If you prefer not to use the aperture ring, you can set it to A and adjust the aperture using the camera dial instead. When you switch from f1.7 to A, it is slightly harder to turn to minimize the chance of accidentally turning in A without realizing it. Next to it is a customizable control ring, which I will talk about in a second. And there are also 2 switches on the lens. One is the usual AF/MF switch, which also includes a macro AF mode. The other switch is for selecting the image aspect ratio. If you don't need to adjust the image aspect ratio, you can customize that switch to control something else, and there are quite a few options available. This is a new change for the L10. Let's talk about the aspect ratio a bit more. On most cameras, when you change the aspect ratio, the image is simply cropped from the full resolution output. That means lower resolution and a tighter field of view. But with the RX100 series and now the L10, we have a multi-aspect design. So when you switch between 4:3, 3:2 and 16:9, while the resolution still changes slightly, but you get the same field of view, which can be a big advantage. The only exception is 1:1, which does require a crop since the sensor is natively 4:3.
On a similar topic, this camera doesn't have my favorite 65:24 aspect ratio because Panasonic just doesn't like to put this aspect ratio on the 4/3 sensor. I understand it will crop away a lot of resolutions, but Panasonic, can you please consider that a lot of us really love the aspect ratio.
You can attach 43mm filters or even a step-up ring to the lens. But first, you need to remove the plastic ring at the front, which is very easy to do. However, once you remove it, the lens does look like it's missing something, and you cannot put that plastic ring back when you have a filter attached. This is a power zoom lens, which means zoom is controlled by a motor. By default, you can use either the zoom lever on top or the control ring on the lens to control the zoom. The zoom operation is smooth and not too noisy. I was hoping the zoom speed would vary depending on how much you push the lever. So for example, I can push it just a little bit for slower, fine adjustments. But unfortunately, the zoom speed is fixed. So I cannot get the zoom to zoom very quickly. And if I want to do precise adjustments with the lever, it is also a little bit tricky. It is still doable, just not as easy as I like. If I use the control ring on the lens, the zoom speed is slower, which makes it easier for fine adjustments. But to me, having two ways to control zoom feels a bit redundant. That said, you can customize the control ring to do something else, like exposure compensation, ISO, or even set it as a step zoom ring that jumps between common focal lengths. One advantage of an electronically controlled zoom is that you can zoom smoothly during video recording. And you can also control the zoom remotely from your phone using the Lumix Lab app. The downside is that you have to wait for the motor. Every time you turn on the camera, the lens needs a moment to extend, and the same when you turn it off. I measured it and it takes 2 seconds from powering on to taking the first photo. For comparison, my Sony a7CR with a standard zoom lens takes just over 1 second. So the actual difference is under a second. Not huge, but I think mentally it feels longer because you are waiting for the lens to extend. Having said that, if I had the choice, I definitely prefer a mechanical zoom lens. One more thing, there's a setting on the camera called
Lens Focus Resume.
If you turn it on, then the lens would return to the previous focal length and focus position when you turn on the camera. Panasonic told us the L10 uses the same sensor as their flagship GH7. Earlier, I mentioned the multi-aspect feature, and the reason this works is because the image circle of the lens is slightly smaller than the sensor. On the positive side, this allows for the multi-aspect design, but on the downside, it means the L10 doesn't use the full sensor area. That's why the GH7 has a 25.2 megapixel sensor, while the L10 is 20.4 megapixel, about 20% lower. But I think 20 megapixel is still more than enough for most people, and is about 4 megapixel more than the RX100 Mark II, so it's still a meaningful upgrade. Just like the GH7, The L10 has dynamic range boost, where the camera combines low and high gain output to achieve over 13 stops of dynamic range. This feature is applied automatically. I did a lot of dynamic range testing with the GH7 and I was very impressed. This time, since I don't have a RAW reader for the L10, I haven't done extensive testing. But from the vlog footage I shot, it already looks very promising. I did, however, run some high ISO tests to see how it performs in low light. All the tests are based on JPEGs straight out of camera using the standard color profile and default settings. From base ISO up to ISO 800, image quality is excellent. At ISO 1600, there's a slight drop in quality, but it's quite minor. Even up to ISO 6400, the results are still very usable. Image quality starts to drop more noticeably from ISO 12800 onwards. I also compared it with the RX100 Mark II. Since the L10 has higher resolution, I resized L10's images to match RX100 Mark II. At low ISO, the difference is quite minor, although the L10 does show slightly more detail, mostly because of the higher resolution sensor. But once you get to mid ISO, around ISO 1600, you start to see a clearer gap. The L10 retains more detail, while the images from the RX100 Mark II start to look like watercolor quite quickly. I say at high ISO, the difference is about 1 stop, maybe even slightly more. So pretty much as expected, L10's low light image quality should be quite a bit better than camera that use a 1-inch or smaller size sensor, but at the same time it can't quite match full frame cameras. People often say Lumix is mainly a video focused brand, and while video is definitely a strength, I don't think that's entirely fair. Lumix offers a huge range of computational photography features, some of which are not even available on the traditional photography brands. And also, pretty much all of these features are done directly in camera without needing extra processing on a computer. The L10 has almost every photo feature that I can think of. Multiple exposure, live view composite for light trials, focus stacking that generates a focus stack JPEG in camera, and HEIF output that you can choose between HDR, HLG, or SDR photos. If you want to get more creative with the output colors of your photos, the real-time LUT feature would be perfect for you. I'll talk about that separately as it's a very important feature and has been upgraded alongside the latest Lumix Lab app. There's also a new soft skin feature that smooths out skin texture slightly to make people's skin look a little bit smoother, younger. Here's a comparison with and without it. You can still see the imperfections on my face, so maybe I need to turn it up to high. This feature is photo only. The one feature that is missing is the high resolution mode that combines multiple shots into a high resolution image. That's likely because the camera uses OIS for image stabilization rather than IBIS, which is required for that feature. There are also two new photo styles, L Classic and L Classic Gold. L Classic Gold gives a warmer look that looks quite nice. But personally, I like L Classic more. It has lower saturation and a slightly greenish tone that I found very pleasing. Of course, there are many other styles as well, including Leica monochrome, which I also really like. In terms of image quality, images are very sharp in the center, even wide open. Edge is also quite good, but the extreme corners are a bit soft. Chromatic aberration is very well controlled. I didn't notice much color fringing at all. Distortion and vignetting are also well managed. In terms of flare control, at wide apertures it looks good, but you may see more lens flare when stopping down the lens, which is quite common. With the fast aperture, you can get some background separation, especially when shooting at the telephoto end. But you need to try get closer to your subject. 4K generally looks nice, although in some cases it can appear a little bit busy. If you switch to macro AF mode, you can focus very close, down to 3 cm at the wide end. The minimum focus distance increases as you zoom in, up to 30 cm at the telephoto end. If you want to shoot fast action, the maximum burst speed is 11 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, or 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter in super high speed burst mode. Using my pro grade 390 64GB SD card and shooting at 11 frames per second, I was able to get around 37 shots, regardless of whether I was shooting RAW plus JPEG, RAW or JPEG only. You can keep holding the shutter and the camera will continue shooting as the buffer clears. One thing to note is that 11 frames per second with the mechanical shutter is single autofocus only. If you need continuous autofocus, the speed drops slightly to 9 frames per second. When shooting in 30 frames per second super high speed burst mode, the buffer is actually slightly larger, around 45 images, again regardless of the output file format. Continuous autofocus is available in this mode. In this mode, once you hit the buffer limit, you need to release and press the shutter again to continue. At that point, the available buffer depends on how many images have been cleared. I was wondering why I got a larger buffer when shooting in super high speed burst mode. Interestingly, I noticed that RAW files shooting in 30 frames per second are slightly smaller, about 0.2 MB less on a approximately 30 MB file. It is a small difference, but it suggests there might be a small reduced data, possibly bit depth. But I would need RAW reader to do some proper tests to find out and confirm what's happening. That said, even if there is a small decrease in bit depth, it usually only matters if you are pushing the RAW files to the extreme. In normal use, you usually won't notice any difference, and if you're shooting JPEG, it doesn't matter at all. With the GH7 sensor and Lumix latest processing engine, we finally get face detection autofocus on a Lumix compact camera. So what does that actually mean in real use, especially if you are coming from the RX100 Mark II? When shooting photo in single autofocus AFS mode, there isn't a huge difference. The older DFD system was already very fast and pretty reliable in most cases, so I don't really notice much change here. But once you switch to continuous autofocus AFC, the improvement is very obvious. Continuous autofocus is much faster and much more reliable, and there's no more background pausing as the camera is trying to track the subject. Because of that, the overall experience and result is much better. In fact, I could now leave the camera in AFC mode when shooting photo, which is something I would never do with the older Lumix DFD autofocus cameras. All the latest subject detection modes are included, and they work very well. There's no joystick on the camera, so you will need to rely on the touchscreen to move the focus point. Personally, I always prefer Panasonic's touchpad AF implementation over a joystick, as I find it much easier and more precise to use the larger screen than the little joystick to adjust focus point. But I know not everyone feels the same. Autofocus isn't completely silent though. Outdoors, you won't notice it, but indoors, I can hear a bit of low frequency noise during focusing in photo mode. Overall, in terms of autofocus performance, this isn't a flagship sports camera, but it's also not meant to be. For everyday use, travel, and even some occasional action shots, the autofocus performance is more than good enough. For video, continuous autofocus performs very well, as expected from a modern Lumix camera. It's very responsive, smooth, and unlike photo mode, I didn't hear any autofocus noise at all. The L10 relies on lens-based optical image stabilization, so let's take a look at how it performs. As usual, I was shooting handheld with no support at all, taking a few hundred photos at different shutter speeds, with and without stabilization, at both 24mm and 75mm. I then went through the images and grouped them into sharp and unsharp. This test really isn't about how slow I can shoot, since that really depends on the photographer, how steady you are, how you stand, how much coffee you had. The goal is to compare results with and without the image stabilization system and see how much of a difference it actually makes. If you look at the graphs, based on my results, the OIS is about 3 stops effective at the wide end and about 4 stops at the telephoto end. My image stabilization test results are usually a bit lower than official figures regardless of the brand. So overall, while 3 to 4 stops real-world performance doesn't sound a lot, but it can still make a big difference when shooting static scenes. 4 stops is the difference between shooting at ISO 400 and ISO 6400. Now, let's talk about one of the most underrated Lumix features that is also available on the L10, which is real-time LUT. I've covered this feature a lot on this channel because I love this feature, and with the L10, there's a LUT button at the back of the camera for that, and Panasonic has made this feature even better. So if you have never heard of this feature, in simple terms, real-time LUT lets you install LUTs onto the camera and apply them directly to your photos or videos, essentially creating your own custom photo styles or film simulations. LUTs are widely used in filmmaking for color grading, and there are hundreds of thousands available online. But the easiest way to get started is through the Lumix Lab app, where you can download a range of LUTs for free and transfer them to your camera. You can also create your own LUTs in the app. The process is quite straightforward, and now with the latest version of Lumix Lab, it even lets you adjust things like grain, color noise, sharpness, and noise reduction, settings that traditionally are not part of a LUT, but now they all save as part of the LUT file. That makes the real-time LUT feature much more powerful and easier to use. There's also a feature called Magic LUT, which can help you generate a LUT from a reference image with just a single click. Now, just to be clear, Magic LUT won't perfectly replicate the original look. Even a professional colorist cannot get you perfect result if you give him just a single real-world photo, but it can get surprisingly close, especially with a good reference image. Once you transfer the LUTs onto your camera, either using the Lumix Lab or using a SD card, you can apply them using real-time LUT or My Photo style, which you can even stack 2 LUTs together. You can also make more adjustments on top as well, like adjusting the LUT strength. The latest Lumix Lab update also adds a feature that was obviously missing since the first release, that is RAW editing. It also allows you to transfer your photos or videos from your camera much faster using USB-C connection. And there are also many other improvements as well. Actually, the latest Lumix Lab update has so many changes, I probably should make a separate video to go through them all. Panasonic has made it super clear that the L10 is not a video focused camera, but the camera shares its sensor and hardware with the flagship GH7, so I'm glad Panasonic didn't disable all those video features because it's not a video camera. So the L10 supports a wide range of video options and features. You can record video in MOV, MP4 or MP4 Lite format. The maximum resolution is 5.6K, 10-bit 420 up to 60 frames per second. You can also record 5.2K open gate up to 30 frames per second, also 10-bit, 4K and Cinema 4K up to 120 frames per second, 1080p up to 240 frames per second. The only limitations I noticed is that 1080p at 240 frames per second doesn't support continuous autofocus or subject detection, but all the other resolutions and frame rates do support both continuous autofocus and subject detection. Most of the recording modes have no additional crop except for the 4.4K open gate mode. Because the camera is a lot smaller than the GH7 and also it doesn't have active cooling, so it's not ideal for long demanding video recordings, especially in hot conditions. But I did some testing just to give you some idea how it performs. In my testing, 4K 30 video in 10-bit 422 long GOP format, I use a pro-grade 64GB V90 SD card. Room temperature was around 22.5 degrees Celsius, so about 72.5 degrees Fahrenheit, warm but not hot. The camera recorded for over 55 minutes until the card filled up. With no overheating at all, I don't even see the overheating warnings. The camera's temperature setting was set to high, so I could just format the card and continue recording for much longer. But I think it's fair to say I can record very long time continuously under this condition. So after I finished the test, I recharged the camera and the next day I did one more test. This time I record more demanding 4K 60, 422 MOV, and the room temperature was a little bit warmer, around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. This time, a temperature warning appeared after about 8.5 minutes, and recording stopped at around 18 minutes because of overheating. So if you want to use this camera for casual shooting or shoot some B-roll, it performs very well. But it's definitely not a camera for shooting long, high frame rate video, especially under high temperature. And now let's talk about the video quality. When shooting on bright sunny day, image quality is excellent across the board. 5.6K footage looks great, and even 4K 120 is very detailed with no noticeable drop compared to 4K 30. While 4K 120 looks great, I do notice 1080 at 240 frames per second, there is some noticeable image quality drop. To test low light video image quality, I shot some video clips from base ISO up to ISO 12800 in 4K 30 with the standard picture profile. The video quality looks excellent up to ISO 1600. Even at ISO 3200, colors and noise are still very well controlled. At ISO 6400, noise becomes more noticeable, but honestly, even at ISO 12800, the footage is still very usable. So if you want to shoot some video at night, it shouldn't be a major issue. Okay, let's do a bit of vlogging style video test. I'm now recording 4K 30 at the wide end 24mm focal length f1.7. Actually, the field of view is wider than I expected. From a 24mm lens, I thought my face would be a bit bigger in the image, which is something I don't like. So I'm just holding the camera using my hand. My hand is pretty much fully extended, and the audio is recorded using the built-in microphone. So this is pretty much the setup I think a lot of people would use when you are traveling and want to shoot some video. You're just holding the camera and using the built-in microphone without any external microphone. So what do you guys think about the audio quality, image quality, and the stabilization result? So next, let me turn on the electronic stabilization as well. Okay, now I have just enabled the electronic stabilization. So The framing is a little bit tighter because the electronic stabilization requires cropping the image a little bit. The image should be a bit more steady compared to before. So what do you guys think? Does it look good enough? Now, one very good thing with the L10 is it finally used the latest Lumix face detection autofocus system. So when you are shooting vlogging video like this, not only the autofocus will be more responsive, but it should also have very minimal pulsing issue compared to the older DFD system.
I think we can say video stabilization isn't quite as strong as the latest Lumix mirrorless cameras like the S12, which has extremely impressive stabilization. Video from the L10 looks a bit shaky, even with electronic stabilization enabled. I found that if I take OIS only footage into DaVinci Resolve and apply stabilization in post, the results actually looks pretty good. So if you are not happy with the in-camera stabilization, adding that extra step in post can give you very steady footage. That said, for general handheld shooting, just standing and pointing the camera, the stabilization works fine. At first, I was wondering why Panasonic didn't call this camera the RX100 Mark III, because the L10 is obviously based on the RX100 Mark II. But after using it for about 2 weeks now, I think I may know the reason. It's because the L10 is not a normal successor in the series. While the overall design is largely the same, a few things are fine-tuned to meet the latest market, and because of that, there are quite a few changes in design. Apart from the size increase, there's a much stronger emphasis on the build quality and make the camera easier and quicker to use. But easier to use also means we lose the shutter speed dial and exposure compensation dial that a lot of traditional photographers would prefer. While video is definitely still a secondary feature, it is a pretty capable video camera for casual shooting, maybe apart from image stabilization. I mean, you can shoot 4K 120 without any crop, open gate, or in 10-bit, and it has most of the GH7's video features, including 32-bit float audio support with the optional microphone or the audio adapter. Usually, I would put out my Lumix review on the day of announcement, but this time, since we were not even told about the camera until a few hours before the announcement, it left us with pretty much no time to do any proper testing. I mean, I could walk around the town, shoot for 2 to 3 days, and then share my thoughts and call it a review, but there's only so much we can test within a short period of time. Even now, after spending almost 2 weeks playing with the camera every day and night, I still feel there are so many things that I haven't properly tested. But this delay did allow me to read the response online and see what people think before I do my review. So there are a lot of people who really love this camera, and also a lot of people who don't. People who love this camera usually because they have been waiting for a fixed lens camera from Panasonic with all the latest technology, or they simply just want a premium fixed lens camera with zoom lens. And finally, we have one. It has pretty much all the features most photographers have asked for, and while I don't think any videographers should swap their latest Lumix for this for video work, the L10's video capability is really a few classes above all the compact cameras on the market. People who don't like it, usually because this is not the camera they have been waiting for. But I do have some good news for you. All camera companies have limited budgets for each new product to keep prices reasonable. And as cameras are getting more complicated these days, development is usually about iterative improvements. On the product development roadmap, each new camera is usually about solving some technical challenges that can be carried forward. Basically creating a new step they can build on for future cameras, or recycling parts as some of you like to call it.
So now with the L10, Panasonic has created a new compact camera platform with a built-in EVF, hot shoe, and a few other new features and changes. This means it becomes a foundation for their future cameras. If you want a smaller micro four thirds camera with all the latest tech, maybe a successor to the GX9, is now much easier for them to make. Or if you want a full frame camera, something like an S9 but with an EVF and hot shoe, is also much easier for them to do now. To be honest, it's a no-brainer that we'll see something like that in the future. The question is more, will it be this year, next year, or later? Well, I don't know. If I did, I wouldn't be saying it here. But for those who want a GM5 successor, unless there's some major technological breakthrough that allows Panasonic to shrink the processor, battery, and heat management, all of them significantly, it's quite unlikely we'll see one. It's just technically very difficult to fit all the latest hardware into such a small body anymore. And even if they could, the price would probably be so high that no one would buy it. Mind you, the GM5 was already not a cheap camera at all when it was launched. I've reviewed a lot of Lumix cameras over the years, actually pretty much every single Lumix camera released in the last 10 years or so. One thing I've noticed is that with each new camera, there's always an emphasis on specs. But when Lumix briefed me on this camera, I was surprised that the emphasis was actually on the design and the feeling of photography. I was really surprised, but I like this approach. While I do a lot of photography jobs these days, I started photography as a hobby. That's because capturing photos brings me happiness, and a lot of the time, it's the process of taking the photo that I enjoy more than the result. It's a bit like when I travel. Planning the trip and getting there is often more enjoyable than actually arriving at the destination. So shifting the focus to the design of the camera and create a camera that people can truly enjoy using is something I like to see. Not just from Panasonic, but from all the camera brands. Cameras are so good these days. If a new camera has 5 more megapixels, autofocus that's 10% faster, or burst speed that's 2 frames per second higher, does it really make a real difference? I mean, yes, it does, but would most consumers want to spend a few $1,000s just for those small incremental upgrades? For me, looking back at the last few cameras I bought, almost none of them were because of the specs. It's usually because the camera looks fun to shoot with, or it's beautiful, or it has some unique design that I've never seen before. Otherwise, my 5-year-old or 10-year-old cameras can still take great photos today. I recently took my GX7 out for a photo walk, and when I got home and looked at the photos, I was really happy with them, even though it's a 13-year-old camera. So I'm not saying specs are not important or cannot sell cameras, but I really like to see camera companies focus more on the fun factor or a bit more experimental like back in 1990s and create something truly unique, or simply create beautiful cameras like this L10. I know I cannot resist the temptation when I see a beautiful camera.
I do really wish this Lumix L10 is a weather sealed camera. If I bought this camera, I would probably still use this camera under a bit of rain. But because Lumix is marketing this camera as a premium camera, so I think weather resistant is one thing a lot of potential customers would really want to have. Especially the RX100 series cameras has a bit of reputation that dust can slowly build up inside the lens.
I think one of the biggest complaints about this camera is probably the price. It's not a cheap camera, especially if you compare the price with the RX100 Mark II. There is a big increase in price. Maybe that's the actual reason why Panasonic doesn't call it a RX100 Mark III. I wish the price is cheaper, But to be fair, L10's launch price is cheaper than the Fujifilm X100VI, it's cheaper than the Leica Deluxe 8, it's the same price as the Ricoh GR4, but the amount of tech and build quality of the L10 is way better than the Ricoh. And don't forget the Ricoh GR4 also has a big price jump compared to the GR3. As a consumer, I definitely want the L10 to be cheaper. But if you look at just how much the price of memory and computer chip has increased over just the last year or two, realistically, if you want a new camera with the latest tech and features, this is the price that you have to pay. When the next Leica Deluxe comes out, I'm totally expecting the price will be over $2,000 US. So yeah, I'll repeat it again, I don't like the price, but this is the reality. So what do you guys think about this Lumix L10? Do you like it or not? I'd like to hear your thoughts.